Okay, all right. All right, okay. So tonight's lecture is part of Seeing Orange, Dutch Design at CCA, and this is a series of lectures by Dutch designers and architects that are going on all week. Seeing Orange is possible due to the enormous generosity of the Consulate General of the Netherlands, and I want to thank them. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming to this lecture. Thank you so much for supporting this lecture and the week's events. We're really very happy. Actually, if we could, it really is very important. So there's a rumor that not just the Dutch consulate office here, but some people from the mayor's office of Amsterdam are here. So, oh, great, thank you. Okay, great. We love the mayor's office of Amsterdam. Okay, another beautiful city by the water, right? Okay. So design culture in the Netherlands seems to be like this inexhaustible source of new ideas and talent, and we really wanted to utilize the generosity of the Dutch consulate to see work from one of the most exciting and really youngest of Dutch architects, and that's definitely Deuce. But in the spirit of new design and young designers, I actually wanted Adam, whose work has some similarities to Deuce, to do the introduction tonight. And just very quickly, Adam is a professor in the architecture program with a specialty in digital design and fabrication techniques. And he comes to CCA from the University of Minnesota, where he also taught digital design, and he was also named a most admired educator by Design Intelligence. So we're very, very lucky to have Adam. So Adam, thanks.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest lecturers tonight, visiting us all the way from Amsterdam. Hans Vermeulen and Hedwig Heinsman, together with their partner, Martine de Wit, am I pronouncing that right? Okay. Founded Deuce Architects in 2004. The office builds what they call public architecture, defined as design that consciously influences daily life. They operate under a manifesto, which I encourage you all to read on their website, that advocates an activist, entrepreneurial approach to architecture and the role of the architect. Their practice ranges from art installations to food installations to product design to event design to architecture and urban planning. Their approach synthesizes the playful with the pragmatic, the visionary with the everyday, and the high-tech with the low-tech. And yet, across all these scales is a fundamental, real optimism and commitment to architecture's social agency. Their recent and ongoing project, the 3D print Canal House, is a great example of this, and I believe it was just visited by our president last week, 2 weeks ago. It's a project which hopefully we'll get to see a little bit tonight, that not only imagines but also proves how new technologies, digital fabrication can be channeled towards designing solutions for social problems as complex as affordable housing. So Hans and Hedwig have lectured widely on their work. They've taught at a number of great schools, including TU Delft and the Rietveld Art Academy. Their practice has been recognized with lots of awards, which is super impressive for such a young office. And it's truly a pleasure to have them here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Hans and Hedwig.
Wow, that was a nice introduction, thank you. And our manifesto is, oh wait, I have to do this. Our manifesto, exactly, I want to talk about that, but also I will show today a little bit more about the 3D print Canal House. But I also took some like real paper manifestos. So after the lecture you can come here and pick it up. My name is Hans Vermeulen. I will do the talk tonight, but it was because if we start to do it together, we need 3 hours or we start to have debate about stuff. So maybe Hedwig, you can stand up. And I will give the introduction talk and then the Q&A then Hedwig will join me on stage. So we're Dutch architects, and our work focuses on 3 pillars. Let's say one-to-one architecture, which varies from very small scale installation in public domain to big transformation project on social housing. Architecture in Holland takes a lot of time So we also designed the process towards architecture. So how do you put the different stakeholders around one table, let's say. And also reprogramming of vacant buildings or parts of cities which are not in use as they could be in use. And reprogramming is also the loop to 3D printing because that's happening in the digital world. Well, in the introduction, public architecture was already quite well explained, so I will give a few of the ingredients of our manifesto connected with a slide with a few projects. And maybe I have to say still that at the moment, besides 3D printing a kennel house, we also work for several clients like Schiphol Airport, for a number of housing corporations, but also, like what was already said, product design for design labels like Itala and also Chanel we did work for. And we like to do. So let's do it. It's kind of the main rule in the office. The office consists of 3 partners and 10 in total at the moment. And it's growing a little bit. And I always like to show this little installation we once did in Rotterdam for the NAI. It's a Dutch Architecture Institute. On the right, you see the flyer we send out via the social networks the night before the actually spontaneous public building we made. And then the next evening, sharp at 9, we made this bar out of umbrellas, which caused a spontaneous street party of 300, 400 people till past 3 in the morning without any permit. And that for us shows, like, in a very simple way, the power of architecture and the power of making beautiful things. And that with very little means, you actually can have a big impact on the level of the public domain. And also, when it looks nice, people actually think that you have a permit. So, because why else would you do something like this? So the police was just driving by and waving all the time, till they found out that we were also serving beers. So, and in this case, we used the infrastructure actually available, the lamppost for construction, of course for light, but also to tap off the electricity for the DJ. Because otherwise you don't have a party. Of course, Buggy Bar refers to the work of Buckminster Fuller. Probably you all know him, and if not, you have to look up his work. Already in the 60s, 70s, of course, we're in the States. Oh yeah, hello. Thinking about, for example, global networks and how we could organize resources on our globe in a more efficient and more equal way. But the global network he didn't have, and we do, is of course the internet. And the interesting thing is that something super small and temporary like the Buggy Bar actually has a global impact or a global effect via these new networks. And the funny thing is also that it still exists online, while in real public domain it already was gone after 6 hours. So this interplay between offline and online for our work is quite important, and we play with it. Actually, it's a way to maybe also make architecture personal again. Because you can actually, as an architect, reach out into the world. And that, on a total different level, we already found out 10 years ago, when we did a project in this kind of generic post-war area in a city called Delft in the Netherlands. And as you can see, this is like apartments stacked on top of each other. They're all the same, and people live in it. So we were thinking, like, how is it actually like to live in such a kind of urban scheme? Because on a model it looks nice, but how does it look and how does it work on the ground? So we asked actually of one of those blocks, actually all the inhabitants, to actually, how do you live? And please draw your floor plan. and show us. And what happened is that they all draw their apartment in a totally different way. So it was a kind of an eye-opener for us that thought like an architect, like how you should draw a wall and a door and how it works, actually doesn't necessarily mean that people will understand that way of communication. So it's really about how to communicate your ideas and your visions and your plans to a broader audience. And in that sense, this confuses us. So what we also use a lot is actually to confuse others, to actually take them out of their daily routine and to actually start to see the city they usually live in a different way. This is a small example we once did for a festival called Love in the City. It's a project by Paradiso, one of the pop temples in Amsterdam. And this was the pavilion, 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter footprint and 4.5 meters high. And when you stepped inside, this was the interior. So the pavilion was made out of 1 tree and 4 giant mirrors, actually creating a little unlimited forest in the middle of the city. And the funny thing is that you know this is the outside again. And the funny thing was that when you knew that you were stepping into a white box. But the funny thing is that actually your brain was tricked. So you really, it was not claustrophobic at all. And it actually became, for 1 month, a kind of like retreat from the bricks and the canals we have. But we don't have that much of forest. This is actually a quite typical Dutch forest because it was, of course, all aligned. That's what we call nature also. And another little confusing project is this breakfast, actually through the window of a house actually quite close to the restaurant you were mentioning, David, in the east part of Amsterdam, and actually bringing a breakfast to a couple, but one was inside their house and the other one was suddenly on the pavement. So with a very simple gesture, actually breaking through the barrier of public and private and play with that. And the funny thing was when she went to the toilet, actually their neighbors also wanted to sit down and have breakfast with their neighbors, which normally they don't do. So, yeah. So, so this is on a small scale that food actually brings people together, and that's often done on a table. So yes, we do use a lot of food installations in our work, but I haven't. That's the only little one I can show you tonight, or I will show you tonight. I want to focus a little bit more on a kind of bigger transformation project we did in the middle of the Netherlands. It's one of the biggest shared housing projects in Europe. And this was 6 years ago when we first entered the project. It's a kind of, maybe not looking very nice. But behind this kind of typical 70s, 80s housing, there was a quite interesting social structure. So there were like 25 shared housing communes almost living behind those typical row house facades. And the client was a housing corporation, and they actually, it was too difficult for them, for their system. It didn't fit in their Excel sheets, let's say. And we said, okay, you can of course demolish it, but then you also will demolish your social capital you have, actually. Because community-based business models are quite normal at the time in the, let's say, the digital world. But in the housing corporation world, often inhabitants are seen as a problem, let's say. So we said, actually, why not, together with the community and the municipality and the client, make a kind of new way of how do you live together in this 21st century? Because if you demolish this housing block, we said you probably will build something generic back. So in the end, we actually reused the whole concrete casco. Casco, is that a... and actually we're, with the community, personalized in a way, very analog way, very old-fashioned way maybe of being an architect, one-to-one with the client or with the persons or with the end user, creating different typologies on how you live together in this age, let's say, where we're all individualists, and at the same time there's a kind of trend that we want to share, not only on the online but also offline. So we stripped the whole blocks actually in phases. So we also designed the whole process of relocating, so people could stay in the neighborhood. And the funny thing was that it was quite wide houses, and in all the load-bearing walls there were already doors, so it was quite easy to kind of make them bigger or connect or disconnect. And in the end, we also put a new facade, but it was mainly about having now a variety of different housing typologies. For example, for more elderly people who now share a guest room, for example, and the younger generation who share a big kitchen or a living room together, or small really single family homes for single parents with kids, let's say. And on the level of the courtyards, they also share. And on the level of the whole block, they share a pub and a movie theater and a workshop space. So for us, it's also really about how you can, like on the housing level, can actually come up with solutions where we have a kind of a grayification, let's say. We're all become very old, let's say, at least in our parts of the world. Yeah, it's a question because social security is big in Holland, maybe a little bit bigger than here. But it also costs a lot of money. So it's really about people need to stay at home for a longer period. So it's really important that you know a bit who is your neighbor and that you can actually help each other as a community. So you know who is your neighbor, but you're not always, well, knowing when he's going to the toilet, let's say, because that was when we entered this project, that was the case. So it's about reprogramming, and that's not only on a monofunctional level like housing, but this is a project we did for the Cobra Museum in Amsterdam and Rijksacademy, which is maybe comparable with where we are now. It was the birthhouse of Karel Appel, a famous Dutch painter of the Cobra movement, also in the east part of the city. And we were asked to actually make short stay apartments for artists at the Rijksacademy, and at the same time they wanted to make a combination program with the museum. So once 1 month a year, it's a museum. So it was like a double program, and on this one hand we had to make like houses, like short stay apartments, which kind of in one shift would feel personal, and at the same time it should have the opportunity to have layered program. So we actually took out all the walls and replaced them with steel walls, very thin steel walls. And the house is actually standing in the market area, so actually with real industrial magnets and steel, they really love each other, so you can easily personalize actually the walls. And then in one weekend they swap it to a museum. So it's actually a quite active house at the moment. I'll take a little bit of water. This is the next ingredient, because besides being an architect and living on this planet, we understood after 10 years that the questions we are dealing with as society are actually bigger than architecture alone. So it's really about how can you cooperate and work together with different disciplines. So a lot of people were talking about this. So we thought, like, why not also do it and actually transform a building in the middle of the city with different companies and start working together, like as a working experiment. So this is maybe nice to show where we work. On the left here, that's the old city, 400 years old. With its famous canals, and on the other side it's the north part of the city, often was neglected by the city, or for a long period was neglected by the city, and now actually slowly becomes a part of the city. And the area we're working at the moment is former Shell terrain. It's 20 hectares, kind of a forbidden city in the middle of the city, where nobody was allowed to actually enter for a long period except the employees of Shell. And now Shell moved a little bit with their high-tech labs, so actually opening up 20 hectares in the middle of the city, which is quite interesting at the moment, and a lot is happening. So it's very nice to actually be in that development as architects with different disciplines. So we have an open data company in our cooperative, because next to being an architect, we also actually made it formal in a different business entity. And it's really about how you organize yourself within the creative industry, within the knowledge industry, to actually be stronger on the market, and also be able to work together with the bigger multinationals. And I don't know how it is here in San Francisco, but in Holland, we have a lot of, like, actually a fragmentation of labor. So a lot of single men or women companies. So it's really about how you can actually organize yourself to actually become bigger again and not be totally fragmented. And that's actually relates to this housing project, where the inhabitants were organized as a kind of foundation in there, or a vereniging. What is that? Kind of foundation. And the interesting thing is that we're all CEOs, so it's very easy to actually connect with the CEOs of the multinationals. One of the projects we're doing at the moment is called Amsterdam Energy. It's actually our own energy company, where we buy and sell green energy, and also stimulate the city and local communities to come up with projects to actually organize, let's say, how you actually can make energy within a city. So there's rules in the Netherlands which allow you actually only to produce your solar energy on your own roof, for example. And when you do it as a collective, it's difficult because you have to pay twice tax. Well, all these kind of barriers we actually try to put on the agenda of the politicians by also doing it, and also showing what you actually can do as a citizen on global issues like energy production, and how we can be also, as a small country, be a little bit more how is it? Independent? Yeah. Actually, also working on different techniques. So this is a propeller in a dike, because we have a lot of water and we have like high tide and low tide. And when you put a propeller in that nature flow, you actually can generate a lot of energy. So it actually opens up, as architects, total new technologies and total new ways of working with different parties. So this is the building we're working from, the low white building, was actually the porch building of the shell terrain. So actually it was like bulletproof glass, and everything was organized to actually keep everyone out. And we're kind of slowly opening that up together with a lot of people and companies working on in the area. And from there we also actually developed the silver tower you see on the right side. It's the big 3D printer. Let's call it innovation. I saw actually upstairs that you also have 3D printers here. We had those printers. It's a Dutch brand, Ultimaker. They're one of the global leaders on do-it-yourself desktop printers. And we had them already quite some time in the office. Also laser cutting, CNC, like say all the family of digital fabrication we used already for quite some time. And then 2.5 years ago we were asked by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands to partake in a very closed, closed competition together with MVRDV, Jurgen Bij, Hella Jongerius and us for an interior Holland was donating to the United Nations building in New York. Hella worked with Rem Koolhaas and they won the project, unfortunately. But it is super nice. It just opened, was opened a few months ago by the Queen. And, but we work together with Joris Laarman and Peter Struiken, and Joris Laarman and Peter Struiken both on different levels actually are working with scripting and computers and how you actually can take digital production into design. And actually working on the UN and on global issues, we thought like what's actually the next step of making, like lacing together umbrellas and also taking the community into the building process and city making. And then we thought like, okay, what's actually the impact of this technique? What can it have for the building industry and for architecture? And then we talk in a way about what people call the third industrial revolution or the social revolution, or we often also say just evolution because just continue in time. And this graph shows like the production of goods actually and the welfare we all have in this world, but it's mass produced. So it, like in the last decades, it moved slowly, labor and the production of things moved to the low labor cost countries. And the promise of 3D printing and digital fabrication actually that you can take, like bring back production into the cities and into the older, let's say, industries. But then we thought like, okay, but then we need a big printer if we want to print architecture. So we made this funny shop, and then we went to the guys from Ultimaker and said like, we want to make a big printer, are you in? And they said, and they were like really busy. So really, they were still working from their garage, let's say, like this kind of super romantic company actually. They're now much bigger already. And they were busy to say like, okay, sure, but maybe come back when you're a little bit farther, let's say, or take some steps. But we really wanted to ask this question, what if we can 3D print buildings? And we really see it as an art, like as a new craft we still have to discover. And we always like to actually refer to the Amsterdam School movement 100 years ago, where we were in Amsterdam quite good in stacking bricks on top of each other, creating nice social housing with nice ornaments. And it's not only about the architecture, it was also a time where the cooperatives, actually the housing, social housing cooperatives were born, and where public and private financing models were created. So it's actually, there are a lot of parallels at the moment 200 years ago, and that's why we often also refer to the new, let's say the new Amsterdam School where we're in at the moment. It links not only, it links of course with the internet, it links to the knowledge of the whole world, let's say. So how you can use the internet to actually bring knowledge to a local question. And by starting to do this project, we we got to know the community of Ultimaker. Those are actually the consumers of the printer, and they start to play with the printer and create upgrades, and actually they share that online on platforms, but also offline in printer meetups. And this was in our office, where they started to print parts of the facade of the printer for us, because those are also quite often nerds, and they like to play with their printer, but they're not designers, so they don't actually, they say like, yeah, you can print everything, but then what do you print? So there's a task, I guess, for architects and designers to actually show what you can make with these kind of techniques. It also relates, of course, to sustainability. Let's say how you can actually recycle all the materials we already have gathered in our big cities, and how you can actually rethink resources. And a very important one is, of course, that a lot of people at the moment live in cities, and the growth of the cities, they do have a kind of, well, issues, let's say, of the current building techniques and how we organize our cities, not yet achieve housing for all the 7 billion people on this planet. And well, maybe 3D printing can be a kind of innovative way of dealing with these issues as well. But those are like the big lines, the global issues. So we thought like, let's start small by building one of the biggest printers on this planet. So we bought a container from eBay, and together with a local contractor, we started to make the print pavilion, because we also were kind of interested in what is the next step of the boogie bar, let's say, you know. So we made a pavilion which actually could print pavilions itself as a mother-child ID. And then when it was finished, at least the pavilion was finished, and we placed it in our front yard of the office, so really in the public domain, and opening up the research and the printer to the people of Amsterdam, actually, and all the tourists which are also visiting Amsterdam. And this is how it often looked in our front yard. And what we have is a printer of 2 by 2 by 3.5 meter. That's the print bed. So that's also the biggest blocks we can make, or we can print. And then on top of that, there's the control room. So there is a computer. So you come there with your USB stick with your house on it, which you just downloaded from the internet, or you created yourself or with an architect. And you put it in the computer, and on the computer there's, I don't know how many of you have a printer actually at home? Anyone? Yeah? Oh, that's quite okay, yeah? Any one of you already used a printer? Just send a file to one of the printer companies. So then you know how it works, but some people don't yet know it. So there's a program on the computer that actually slices the 3D model into layers, generating it's so-called a G code. It's actually a 3D PDF, let's say, and that's being sent to the printer head, which is in an X, Y, and a Z gantry. And the differences with the big printer and the smaller printers is that we print actually, the XY frame goes up, so the floor stays. So we start on ground level and then we go up, and in the smaller ones often the platform goes down. But that's because we print with more kilos, so then this stays the same weight. And the difference is that we print with granulate instead of filament. So in the smaller ones you have a thread going into the printer head, and here we use actually a big extruder, and we heat it up in the machine to a temperature of, with the current material we print with, to 175 degrees, and then it liquefies and it goes through this preheated tube or hose to the printer head. And then it actually, this is it's a few months old, half a year old actually, this, but this shows actually the process of printing. So layer by layer, your 3D model is being made. And what you see here, we at the moment testing with different materials. This is polypropylene. It's oil-based. At the moment we're printing with bio-based material. And it's also just to really start to understand material properties, start to understand the machine, and updating it constantly, actually. And the nice thing about this project, I guess, and what it makes it a little bit different project from other big-scale printer projects in the world, is that we actually are quite open. So it's really in the public domain. People can come, visit, and put their knowledge and ideas into the project. And it differs from people from the neighborhood. Funny thing was that once a lady from the neighborhood, she visited the printer with her broken coffee machine lid, and she said, like, can you print this? Because then I can use it again. And then we thought, like, yeah, but we're printing a house, come on. But then if you think like a little bit longer, then it's a brilliant idea, actually, and it also shows that the potential of this is that you can reuse things like for a longer period. Instead of throwing it away, go to the shop and buy a new thing. So it's local community, but also companies visiting. And this were always like to. It's a nice picture always of the Toyota delegation from Japan, who also visited. And it also shows that there are really different sectors interested in 3D printing on a big scale. So it's not only architecture, but it's really about that you can actually step over your border of your discipline, actually look for connections to make new solutions. And this was 2 weeks ago when Holland hosted the nuclear summit or security summit in The Hague. And then Obama actually really landed on Schiphol Airport, took his choppers and landed in front of the Rijksmuseum. He was given a tour through a very nice museum we have, and it's reopened, so everybody should go there. But it's really about, of course, history, but it's also about future. So that's why actually we were quite honored, of course, that the mayor of our city, who is also here in San Francisco at the moment, presented to the president of your country our project, really showing that Amsterdam was an innovative city and still is, and it really connects actually this project also the history of the city and the future of the city. So 400 years ago we started to dig our famous canals, and often people know our city like this. So with the rings of canals, and we thought, like, while the north was so often neglected in the city planning department and in the mental maps of our city, of our citizens, why not start to also look 400 years into the future and start to make the northern canal belt and actually complete the city by printing a canal house 2.0, let's say, with our printer. And why a canal house? That's what it's nice about a canal house is, of course, that it's richly ornamented, and it's really showing a personal way of dealing with architecture, but it always was also a combination of program, like the Karel Appelhuis. It was always a kind of combination of work, living, storage, innovation, and because of the canals, it was also really open to the world. So there's a nice analogy with the internet, actually, that we often say that actually the canal belt was kind of the first global network, and back then it was the sailing ships, and now maybe it's the 3D printer which connects the rest of the world. So we started with Ultimaker as a partner, and at the moment by building or working on the house, different partners joined in. It's also important because it's actually quite big. It's like a growing snowball project, and we cannot do that alone. So also these kind of talks always are a kind of invitation to people to also join with knowledge or with other means the project. But we're super honored always to have these names on the board already with Henkel from Germany. It's one of the global leaders on adhesives and washing powders. And Heijmans, which is one of the biggest constructing companies in Holland. The city of Amsterdam, of course, is a very important partner by providing a location, but also by opening up their regulation system. So this is a free zone where we're working in. In a free zone, it's not that we can do everything, but it shows that the city of Amsterdam also is open enough to think with us in how can you actually how can you build with this? Because we can, of course, not yet say it will look like this, we have all the regulations, and it will be safe like this and this and this and this. Of course, it should be, but we don't know yet because the whole process is about finding out. And we have a couple of the smart city partners of Amsterdam, also connecting it again to the web and to the bigger resources lines a city deals with. How long do we have? It's okay. 7:50, I can see that. So within the whole project, we defined 6 what we call R and do topics. So it's research and design, but it's also research and do, and also show it. One, of course, is the continuation of the development of the kamermaker. It's called kamermaker. In Dutch, it's room builder. So we can print rooms. Room by room, we print a house. We also are developing a second one, just because we learned from the first one as the first prototype. And it's also to actually scale up a little bit our production capacity, of course, because we only have 3 years. That's a bit the time frame we set for this research project together with all the partners. And we're also working on sensor technology to put into the printer so it becomes more self-learning and adaptive for, let's say, surroundings. So you can imagine we print outside, which is super nice, but it's also super stupid because there's rain and there's wind and it freezes. So like the surroundings always changing. It's always changing. So with sensor technology, we actually want to make it actually that it can print everywhere on this planet. So when it's humid and dry, or humid and dry, when it's humid and hot, for example, in Mumbai, it also can print, and it will communicate that to the software of the printer. The second one, very important one, is sustainable 3D print material. Because first we didn't have a printer, now we don't have print material. So that's why we're very happy to have Henkel on board, because they have the resources to actually, together with us and the data, the output we generate while printing, create the right material. The third one is, of course, a very important one as an architect. Again, how do you construct with these kind of techniques? The fourth one is downloadable architecture. We really think that that's also a very smart, that's the next step of how to share designs worldwide. I once heard that we as architects only have a market share of 2% of what is being built on this planet. So there's something to gain, let's say. And by actually opening up designs to a wider audience or to the masses, you can also provide housing or good housing to more than at the moment. The fifth one is smart buildings. In that topic, we are searching for how you can actually put data and connect the internet also in your building process, but also maybe print sensors so it actually starts to talk to itself, the house, and to other houses in the whole canal belt, let's say. And the sixth one is actually going from one house to, again, the city and to the solutions this can actually offer for the bigger issues I just addressed. And it all comes together on the Public Building Expo. So this is the location of where the house is being built at the moment. And it's not yet finished, but we just opened already the site for the public, so everybody can come and visit and see how we are building the house. And that's quite amazing that already, like within the first 3 weeks since we're open, already more than 2,000 people visited the site. Actually, yeah. And so. Yeah, that's quite funny, or that's not only funny, but also it shows the power of making, let's say. And what's so nice is that everybody understands again, or it helps you to understand how things are being made. And in our cities, or at least in the western part of the world, the gap between making and consumers became quite big. And yeah, it's nice that people have kind of in their DNA the urge of making, and they, yeah, people like that, so that's good to see, and it also helps the project again, because we have a little entrance fee of $250, and with that you donate actually to the project, but everybody is able to visit as well. This is the 13 rooms, like in a kind of way how we're going to construct also the house. So at the moment we print on the ground floor because that's quite safe. So like a kind of Dogville style setting, let's say. And as soon as we have enough knowledge and we know how to construct it in a safe way, we can stack the rooms on top of each other. And by so also make the house movable actually. Because we're on a spot which is in development, so maybe we have to move a little bit along the canal during the 3 years. And at the moment, the first parts are being built. This is the entrance room we're at the moment building. It's a 6 meters high entrance room with a chandelier in it, and the stairs to the first floor. And the rooms consist of different elements because we have 2 by 2 by 3.5 meters. So it's actually kind of Lego for adults, we sometimes say. And you also see that we're really focusing on learning about the technique on the level of the block and on the level of how you construct a wall and how you can actually think in a different way about how you deal with water systems in your house, how you deal with electricity and isolations and the whole energy ecosystem of the house. So we kind of first started with a space frame section for strength, but also it creates shafts which can be used for insulation or ducts, or also connecting the 2 pieces or the 2 hundreds of pieces together. So we can use the shafts also to enforce it with a second material. So at the moment we have the left situation, and the upcoming weeks we grow to the right situation, and then in summer we opening this room officially. And at the moment we're like working with Heijmans as a constructing company and with other people to really think like how can you make it safe and how can you actually use this technique again to connect the rooms together. So that's like this is really a slide just in progress, just fresh from the table, just to show you a bit how we work and actually do research while printing. This is a print screen, quite well, just to show you that it's also a different way of designing. Actually, it's a dynamic design. Actually, it's per metric, and actually the right part of this print screen is that's the design actually. So it's all we're at the moment working with Rhino and Grasshopper, and so we script actually the design, and that's interesting in the theme of in the topic of downloadable architecture. So you can imagine that these are all parameters which can be actually given free to consumers. So you can actually personalize that part of the design to your own needs and to your own wishes, while the rest of the let's say, the DNA of the design stays, and also secures regulations and safety, etc., etc. So the purple part can be the link to these kind of devices where interface design and other software applications can actually be part of design process to work between architects, production machine, and the client. So that's really about what we think is that what would be the Spotify of architecture, of what would be the iTunes of architecture, and how can you find new business models also for that, for we as architects, but also for the rest of the whole building industry chain. Which actually is making this a kind of digital craftsmanship. And the small ones actually they're 1 to 20 scale for us. So we really have a model maker tool which is using the same file, using the same material, and using the same building technique as the big one. So we can really use the smaller 3D printer in our design process and also in the communication with others. And then when we think like it's nice and it works and this is how we want to make it, we send it to the big one, and then the big one actually produces that same file, but then on a 1-to-1 scale. So this is a little time-lapse movie of how this works. This is the first block. At the moment, these kind of blocks still take 80 hours of printing. But we're working together with the partners also on different levels on how to speed up this process. Of course, when you print 24/7, 80 hours is only 3 days. When we make a second one, we can print twice as fast. And with the material research and development, we can speed up the printer as well. Because actually the XY frame can go super fast, but the material we're now working with is this is the second block that goes faster, as you can see. So this is how it's like on site at the moment. That's the material thing is actually quite an issue with 3D printing. Actually, not only on the architecture level, but on all levels, because the market pool is not yet that big that big companies are investing a lot of money to actually develop the right materials. So that's why we're super happy that Henkel as a big company is in our team. And with them, and the interesting thing is maybe that they're not from the building industry. So they come from a total different angle. And that actually opens up also for us as architects to really rethink, not only on the design level, but also on the material level, how you make buildings. So of course a very important one is sustainability in this, and also how you can recycle the things you print. Because actually it's quite simple. If we do a misprint, we just shredder it and we put it back into the printer, so we don't have any waste. And the interesting thing about 3D printing is, besides the internet and community-based design, is that you don't need that much of transportation of products. So you only have to move resources from one place maybe to the other, or really use local resources. All the products are being sent via the internet, so all the harbors and all the transport lines maybe are going to totally flip on this planet if this becomes super big. But again, that's maybe in a few years' time. At the moment, we're still doing this loop. It's an iterative process on how the printer performance actually goes up when we have better materials. And that also gives us more design freedom and also a better constructive house. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We printed this last months with different materials. At the right side, you see actually a glue from Henkel. So it's a macro melt. It's called. It's a hot melt family. We often say like it's a bit in the middle of a glue and becoming a plastic. And the interesting thing is that this is now the base of the print material, and together with their scientists, we're actually on a molecule level redesigning the material. What's interesting about this glue or plastic is that it's being made to actually glue boxes, and that they were thinking like you cannot even print with this, but we already showed that it's actually already possible. And an interesting thing is that it doesn't shrink, because plastics, when you heat it up and you cool it down, it starts to shrink, and that creates tension within the material, so it breaks often. And this is not the case in this material. So it's, of course, we're not scientists, but you, as designers, you can show what you want to make, and you can show in a quite direct way how you want to improve the material. And this is also something we're working on, is that we don't actually want all people on this planet to live in plastic houses, of course. But we're also testing with wood, or like say the combination of wood chips and a polymer, and then you actually print MDF. So instead of pressing it into plates, you actually can make other geometries with it. And this shows like that with a few drops of pieces of black granulate, we can make the gold material actually totally black. But when you take them out, it again appears like a kind of gradient to gold. And at the moment, we're testing with double crosses, let's say, in the geometry, of course, to make strength and to also show that this is what 3D printing can do, actually. So you don't extrude and make the same, let's say, section over and over again, but you actually can, in a three-dimensional way, rethink the geometry of a wall, or rethink, not everything, but a lot, let's say. So this shows actually in one element 2 directions of shafts. And you can imagine that the cross, of course, creates strength and also enables us to, with the second material we're testing at the moment, actually to connect the different elements together. And this scripting is not only interesting in personalizing architecture, but also enables us to, as designer, rethink technologies, let's say, in a smarter way. So, for example, this shows how we're now, with the ornament you saw on the blocks, it's just kind of a diamond-shaped ornament, actually enlarges the facade surface. So imagine that you can print with solar panels. Then you can actually integrate the angle of your facade with the angle of the sun on a specific spot on Earth, let's say. So you can imagine that the angle of the sun in San Francisco is different than the angle of the sun in Amsterdam. So before you print your house, you just fill in your geolocation, and then the facade moves, or the scripted design moves towards the perfect, efficient angle. And then you print it. So it shows that you can actually rethink new technologies within design. Another thing is that we can use these shafts also for distributing water to the specific areas in the house where it's needed. So that's called the rain room, which is actually the toilet of the house. So this is the, well, the Kamermaker also shines often. It's a mirror, but this shows a bit how the sun actually can be reflected on the facade. And of course, at the moment we only have one, but we can imagine that actually it will become like a family of big printers, and also that refers to the sensor technology we're now with IMTech adding to the printer. So they become actually a platform in which they can learn from each other, but also connecting the different communities we hope soon will, like the Fab Labs and the tech shops, will appear around also on big scale printing, because we need more people to make this even better, let's say. And then they start communicating. So that's what we're already doing. This is like a snapshot of the exhibition or the shop we have next to the building site. And And here we show people the ideas we have, and people can share their ideas with us. And we do that online and offline. And I invite you all to drop by when you're in Amsterdam. And I also, again, want to thank CCA for inviting us, and the Dutch consulate for making this possible. And we hope you also tell the mayor a little bit more about this project. And we also, of course, he will be a regular visitor here, or there on site. Thank you so much for listening. It was my pleasure.